Great, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. And I'd like to start by talking about two separate incidents that took place around the same time in 2021. The first incident, I'm sure will be familiar to many of you, is the incident of the teacher at Batley Grammar School in Yorkshire who was forced to go into hiding. For those of you who don't know this story, he taught a lesson about free speech and religion and decided to show an image of a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. And this was a pre-planned lesson. He discussed it with colleagues in advance. When a report circulated that he had done this, some parents locally and activists protested outside the school, and then a number of threats were issued to the teacher online and offline, and the teacher and his family went into hiding. And bear in mind, this incident took place only a few months after a French teacher had been murdered by Islamist extremists for doing something similar. So the school in that case, rather than defend the teacher, decided to suspend the teacher and apologise to the local parents. And the council, Kirklees Council, praised the school for doing that. The West Yorkshire Police, as far as anyone knows, didn't arrest anybody for issuing those threats. And as I said, the teacher is still in hiding. So that's the first incident. The second incident I want to talk about took place only a few weeks after this in Scotland. A feminist and gender-critical campaigner called Marion Miller was arrested by the police and charged under Section 38(1) of the Criminal Justice and Licensing Act in Scotland for allegedly tweeting 3 transphobic comments. Miller is part of a group called For Women Scotland. I think they might even be here today. And she was accused of hate crimes. The charge against her was eventually dropped a few months later. But what was her actual crime? Had she endangered anyone? Had she caused any individual to feel that their safety was under threat? No, she had expressed a viewpoint on Twitter, very strident viewpoint, one that some people might find offensive. But essentially, she had expressed an opinion. So what do these two different cases tell us about the way in which we talk about extremism and the way in which authorities respond to it? Well, I think that they suggest a huge confusion about what is extremism and what we should be prioritising. So in the case of Batley, I think that the authorities, the police, the school, the council, didn't take seriously enough a very real and genuine threat against an individual, a public servant, because they were more worried about offending local religious leaders. And that's the conclusion that was also reached by Dame Sarah Khan, who published a review earlier this year looking at this kind of intimidation and harassment. She has a quite long section about this particular case. In the case of Marion Miller, the police did intervene, but on the basis that she had expressed an opinion. And even though there was no evidence of threat to any individual, that individual was then put through hell for several months for tweeting. So one kind of extremism, the most frightening kind, the threat to your life, the threat to your family's life, is basically given a free pass, is not criticised, is not challenged by authorities. And the other kind of extremism, you might call it a strong opinion, is being policed in a very active way. And I've picked these cases as illustrations because they're not unique. The Khan review, which I just mentioned, describes, I think, a serious problem, a growing problem of intimidation, threats, harassment, security risks to people, to public servants. The review details lots of well-known cases of politicians, artists, journalists, people working in public services coming under attack for expressing a view and being intimidated by activist groups or very, very nasty individuals. And the review that she published also includes a survey of around 1,200 people. And about 69% of people in that survey said that they feel they have to censor the way that they live and what they can say in their personal and professional lives due to the fear of harassment, which I think is an extremely worrying number. So I think we should be very concerned about that level of intimidation. I think it has grown in recent years, and we can point to lots of different reasons for that. Social media is one, maybe a shift in generational attitudes. But I think the most important reason is that it works. We now know that lots of activist groups, if they want to silence debate, if they want to stop their opponents from disagreeing with them, can simply issue a threat, can use violence, can use harassment, can claim or show that there might be some conflicts as a result of someone else speaking. And they can effectively bully the authorities into shutting down debate and shutting down their opponents. That's the heckler's veto that we now have, and which is now extremely common and widespread. And that's why when you hear about universities cancelling events with controversial speakers, it's not usually said that they're cancelled because of what they say. It's cancelled on security grounds, on safety grounds. We cannot guarantee the safety of the speaker, of the audience, and therefore we cannot proceed with this event. And that's basically saying if anyone issues a threat of violence, they get to win. They get to close down everybody else. And it's a form of bullying. On the flip side, these same activists are very happy to accuse other people of being extremists. So they will argue that their opponents are causing psychological harm, that they are creating a risk to psychological safety, not actual physical threats, but psychological safety, which is why you have this bizarre situation where the police are going out and prosecuting people for supposedly transphobic comments, at the same time doing very little to protect gender critical feminists from attending events without being harassed or in some cases being violently threatened. What the police, what the authorities are being drawn into policing and censoring is opinion, as Soki says, but not necessarily tackling the genuine threats that people have that are harming our civil liberties. It also explains the same paradox, I think, where Islamist extremists, sympathizers to those extremists, will argue that who are very, very keen and very happy to attack secular Muslims, attack other minority groups like Jews, but then themselves complain that they are victims of Islamophobia and want to restrict the speech of other people. So I think that there's a real growth in intimidation and harassment by activist groups, and they are very adept at playing the victim card and calling other people extremists, fascists, transphobes, racists, etc., in order, very, very explicitly, very deliberately as a tactic to try and stop people from debating issues. So to be absolutely clear, I am not an extremism denier. I think there is a kind of extremism that exists in the UK and in other countries. And I think the state does have a right and a duty to protect individuals, to protect people's rights and abilities to have speech, to have debate like the one that we're having today. I also think it's perfectly reasonable for the government to want to monitor people who have extreme views up to a point and to have programs like Prevent, because I do think we need to try and minimize and reduce the threat of terrorism. And we need people to be looking at what's happening online and what people are saying. But I would draw the line and say, ultimately, people do have the freedom and should have the freedom to express their opinions. I also think it's perfectly reasonable for the government to say that they don't want the civil service or government to engage with people who are very active and hostile and willing to use violence to further their aims. So I think that's reasonable. I don't think it's reasonable for government, police, authorities to start censoring our speech and our debate. And I'm sure if I had more time, I could think of lots of other examples, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yes, we can come back to it.